always said I had soft eyes. My neighbor used to tell me that every Sunday after church. "Edna, you've got the kindest eyes I've ever seen on a woman." I used to take that as a compliment. Now I think it just meant people could see I wasn't going to fight back. I need you to understand who I am before I tell you what happened. Because when I tell you, some of you are going to say I was cold. Some of you are going to say no, Mother should do what I did. And I want you to know exactly what kind of woman was pushed to that place before you make up your mind. My name is Edna. I am 67 years old. I worked 31 years as a licensed practical nurse at a county hospital in central Georgia. 31 years of 12-hour shifts, of holding strangers' hands while they passed, of eating lunch in a supply closet because there was nowhere else to sit during a double. I did not come from money. My mother cleaned houses. My father worked the line at a textile plant until it closed, and then he cleaned houses too. I learned early that nobody was coming to rescue me. You either built something or you did without. When my son was born, I made him a promise I never said out loud. I promised him he would never feel what I felt. That particular cold of not having enough, of watching other kids have things you couldn't name but knew you were missing. I kept that promise for 34 years, and it cost me more than I want to calculate. His father left before my son turned 2. There was no dramatic goodbye, no argument I could point to. One morning there was a man in my house. 3 weeks later there wasn't. I grieved that for about 6 months, and then I got up and went back to work because I did not have the luxury of staying down. I raised my son alone. I worked nights so I could be home when he got off the school bus. I packed his lunch every single day, not cafeteria food, a real lunch, because I had read somewhere that kids who ate well in school performed better, and I held on to things like that. I drove a 2003 Civic with a cracked dashboard until my son was in high school. I didn't replace it because the money I would have spent on a car payment went into his savings account instead. He didn't know about that account. I wanted it to be something solid I could hand him when the time came. By the time my son graduated college, first in our family to do it, I had $74,000 set aside for him, not inherited, not gifted. 31 years of night shifts and packed lunches and a cracked dashboard. I want you to hold that number, because it matters. He met her his senior year. I'm going to call her what she was to me, his wife. I will not say her name. She came from a family that had money in the way that makes people assume they deserve more of it. Her parents had a lake house. They took vacations to places I had only seen in magazines and waiting rooms. When my son brought her home for the first time, she looked around my living room the way people look at something they're trying to figure out how to politely not touch. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself that a lot over the next several years. They got engaged the following spring. My son called me on a Tuesday night, so excited he was tripping over his words. I cried. Good tears. The kind that come from the bottom of you. I told him I was proud of him. I told him she was lucky. I meant it. I did not get a call about the wedding planning. Her mother handled that. I understood her family was contributing more financially, so I stepped back. I bought my own dress. I paid for my own hotel room in the city where the wedding was held, 4 hours from where I lived. I sat in the third row because the first 2 were reserved for her side, and I smiled through the whole ceremony, and I meant that too. After the wedding, things shifted in ways I couldn't have named right away. It was small at first. My son stopped calling on Sundays the way he used to. When I called him, the conversations got shorter. There was a background noise I started associating with those calls, a kind of flatness, like he was somewhere he wasn't quite comfortable talking freely. I started driving up to see them about once a month. 4 hours each way, in a different car now. I'd finally bought myself a used Camry when my son finished school. I would bring food because I wanted to contribute something, and cooking is how I show love. Collard greens, cornbread, a roast. Things my mother made me. His wife never ate what I brought. The first time I thought she just wasn't hungry. The second time I noticed she made herself a separate meal while my food sat on the counter. By the 4th or 5th visit, it became something I couldn't ignore. The food I brought always ended up in the trash, and she never said a word about it directly, not even a thank you, before it was gone. My son never said anything either. I kept bringing food. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I kept hoping something would shift. Maybe I just needed to keep doing the thing that felt like me. About a year into the marriage, I gave them the $74,000. I want to be clear about this because people are going to have opinions. I gave it freely. I did not attach conditions in writing. I told my son it was for them, for whatever they needed, a down payment, security, whatever made sense for their life. He cried. He hugged me for a long time in the driveway of my house and said, "Mama, I don't know how to thank you." I told him just being happy was enough. I drove home from that visit feeling lighter than I had in years. They used the money as the down payment on a house in a suburb north of Atlanta. Nice neighborhood. 4 bedrooms. I visited twice before I stopped being invited. The second visit is the one I need to tell you about. It was a Saturday in October. My son had called and asked me to come up for his birthday dinner. He was turning 33. His wife's parents were going to be there, her brother and his girlfriend, 2 couples from the neighborhood. I bought my son a watch, not expensive, but thoughtful. One of those field watches he'd admired years earlier in a store window when we were walking through downtown together, and he thought I wasn't paying attention. I had been paying attention. I always was. I arrived at 4 o'clock because dinner was at 6 and I wanted time to visit before everything got formal. When I knocked, his wife answered the door. She looked at me the way you look at someone who's arrived on the wrong day. She let me in. The house smelled like something catered, not homemade. Not the kind of smell I associated with family dinners. Her parents were already there, settled into the living room like they owned the furniture, which I suppose in some sense they felt they did. Her mother gave me a polite smile. Her father shook my hand. My son came out from the kitchen and hugged me. He seemed glad I was there. At least that's what I told myself at the time. Dinner was served at a long table in their dining room. I counted 8 chairs. I sat down at the seat closest to the kitchen. I didn't want to be presumptuous about where I belonged. His wife's mother sat at one end, her father at the other. My son sat next to his wife across from her brother. His wife came out of the kitchen, looked at the seating, and said, and I am going to tell you exactly what she said, because I have never forgotten a word of it. She said, "Actually, we're going to need that seat for someone else. There's a spot set up for you in the kitchen." I thought I had misheard her. I looked at my son. He was looking at his plate. There was a small table set up in the kitchen, a folding table, a single place setting on it facing the wall. I sat there. God help me. I sat there. God help me. I sat there. I ate my son's birthday dinner at a folding table in his kitchen, 4 feet from where they were all laughing and passing dishes, and I told myself it was fine. I told myself maybe there was a reason. Maybe the seat really was for someone else and they just hadn't explained it. My son came in once to refill a serving bowl and paused when he saw me sitting there, and I smiled at him, and he looked away and walked back out. Nobody came to that seat. It was empty the whole evening. I drove home in the dark that night, and I did not cry until I was past the county line. Then I pulled over on the shoulder of I-75 and I cried for about 20 minutes, and then I fixed my face and drove the rest of the way home. I did not call my son for 3 weeks. When he finally called me, he said he was sorry things had gotten awkward. Awkward. That was the word he used. He said his wife was going through some stress and that I should try to understand where she was coming from. I asked him what she was going through. He said it was complicated. I said, okay. We hung up. I went back once more. I don't know why. I think sometimes grief makes you do things that look like hope. It was February, a Sunday. I had driven up without calling ahead because my son had been asking me to stop by more, and I thought maybe a casual visit would be easier. I knocked on the door. His wife answered. She was holding her phone. She said, "He's not here." I said, "Do you know when he'll be back? I drove up to see you both." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I think you should call before you come next time." This isn't really a good time. It's never really a good time, honestly. She closed the door. I stood on that porch for a moment, just stood there. Then I walked back to my car and I sat in their driveway for about 10 minutes. I wasn't crying, I was thinking. Clearly, maybe for the first time in a long time. I drove home and I called my attorney. His name is not important. I had used him before for some paperwork when I refinanced my house. I told him I needed to review some documents. Here is what those conversations revealed. When I gave my son the $74,000, I had signed it over as a gift, with no conditions and no repayment structure. That money was gone in the legal sense. I had no claim to it, and I had always known that. I am not a woman who gives with strings attached, and I want to be clear that I never intended to take that money back. What I was looking for was different. What I was looking for was clarity on what I still held. I still held a great deal. Over the years, I had been quietly generous in ways that had no paper trail at first, but some did. I had co-signed on my son's car loan when he was 25, and his credit wasn't established. That loan was paid off, so that was a closed matter. But there were other things. A personal loan I had extended when they were renovating the kitchen of the house, $12,000, which I had written down on a simple promissory note because my attorney had advised me years ago to always document even family loans. That note was still valid. There was also a matter of a savings bond I had taken out in both our names when my son was in middle school and never fully resolved. Small, but mine to reclaim with the right paperwork. And there was the question of a storage unit I paid for monthly that held furniture I had given them when they moved into the house. Technically still on the lease in my name. None of this was dramatic. None of it was devastating. But I started tending to all of it quietly. I called in the promissory note, politely, through my attorney, with 30 days' notice as the document required. I removed my name from the storage lease and arranged for the furniture in it. A bedroom set that had belonged to my mother, which I had given them for the guest room, to be retrieved. I closed out the savings bond and deposited it into my personal account, and I made one other decision. I transferred my nursing pension beneficiary designation, which had listed my son as the primary beneficiary, to my younger sister instead. It was my right to do that at any time, and I exercised it. Then I stopped calling. I want to tell you what happened after, because I know you want to know. My son called me in April, about 6 weeks after the promissory note came through. He was not calm. He said I had blindsided him. He said he couldn't believe I would do something like this. He used the word cruel. He said his wife was devastated, and I will be honest with you, that word landed somewhere unexpected in me. Not with guilt, but with a kind of exhausted wonder. She had been comfortable eating dinner with me in the kitchen. She had been comfortable closing a door in my face in February, but she was devastated by paperwork. I let my son say everything he wanted to say. I did not interrupt. When he finished, I said, I want you to think about the Saturday in October when you let me eat alone in your kitchen at a folding table while your wife's family sat at your dinner table. I want you to think about February on the porch. And then I want you to ask yourself what you would have done. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Mom, you know how she is. I said, yes, I do. And now you know how I am. I hung up. I have not spoken to my son since that April. That is 14 months ago now. It is the longest we have gone without speaking in his entire life. And there are mornings I wake up and that fact sits on my chest like something physical. I will not pretend it doesn't hurt, losing a child. Even an adult child who is still walking around in the world is its own particular kind of grief that doesn't have a name I know. But I also wake up every morning in my own house, and I know who I am. My sister checks on me twice a week. A woman I worked with for 20 years, Lorraine, meets me for coffee on Thursdays. I have my church. I have my garden in the backyard that my mother would have loved. Tomatoes, collard greens, a fig tree I planted 3 years ago that finally gave fruit this past summer. I am not alone. I am not bitter. I am just no longer willing to sit at a folding table and call it a seat. I have thought a lot about what I would say to my son if he called tomorrow. I think I would listen first. I think I would need him to say, with his own mouth, what he saw that October night and what he chose. Not his wife's choices, his. Because he was there. He filled the serving bowl, and he looked at me, and he looked away. That is the thing I need him to reckon with. Not because I want an apology I can hold over him, but because I don't think you can build anything real between two people if one of them is pretending a folding table was fine. I know he loves me. I have never doubted that. Love and courage are not the same thing. And I think that is what he is still learning. If you are watching this and you have a mother who shows up, who drives 4 hours, who brings food, who saves for 30 years and hands it over without conditions, I want you to hear me. She is not guaranteed. Her softness is not a promise that she will stay regardless. Even the kindest eyes get tired of not being seen. I gave everything I had, and then I gave myself back. That's the whole story. I have sat with this story long enough now to say something I couldn't have said a year ago. What happened to me was not an accident. It was the end of a long chain of choices, mine and his, and every single link had a weight I can name if I'm honest. I chose to give without asking for acknowledgement. I chose to drive 4 hours and bring food that ended up in the trash and tell myself I was being uncharitable when something in me knew better. I chose to sit at that folding table and smile. Those were my choices. I own them. And I think that is where the wisdom starts. Not in what he did, but in the moment I finally stopped pretending my choices weren't choices. There is a thing that happens to people who give a great deal. They start to confuse giving with worthiness. They think that if they just give enough money, enough patience, enough miles on the highway, eventually the people they love will see them clearly. I believed that for 34 years. And what I learned at 67 years old, eating alone in my son's kitchen while his in-laws laughed 10 feet away, is that giving does not make you visible. Only boundaries do. That is not bitterness talking. I want to be careful here because I know how it sounds, but I have thought about Edna, about myself, and about what I was teaching my son by staying. I was teaching him that I didn't mean it when I felt hurt. I was teaching him that love from a mother has no floor, no bottom, no point at which she will say, "This is not acceptable." And a person who learns that lesson does not become kinder. They become less careful. Not because they are evil, but because nobody ever made it cost anything. That is what I mean by cause and effect. Not punishment from the universe, not fate. Just the plain mathematics of how people learn to treat each other. When there are no consequences, behavior doesn't change. When I finally attached consequences, calmly, legally, without a single raised voice, something shifted, not in him, not yet, but in me. Courage is not the same as confrontation. I used to think standing up for yourself meant an argument, a scene, a moment where you make someone understand. I don't believe that anymore. Real courage, I think, is the quiet kind. It's calling your attorney on a Tuesday. It's changing a beneficiary form. It's driving home in the dark and pulling over and crying and then continuing home anyway. It's deciding that your own dignity is worth the same careful tending you gave everyone else's comfort for decades. If there is anything I want to leave with you, it is this. Intelligence is not just what you know. It is knowing when a situation is costing you more than it is worth, and having the clarity to act on that knowledge even when the person involved is someone you love. Lorraine said something to me over coffee last spring that I have not stopped thinking about. She said, "Edna, some people only recognize value when it's no longer available." I think she was right. I think my son is still learning that. And I think that is his work to do, not mine. I gave everything I had. Then I gave myself back. And I am still here, growing figs in my backyard, having coffee on Thursdays, waking up every morning knowing who I am. That has to be enough. And it is.